Hey guys, this video we're going to look at how tightening welfare access can improve aggregate supply conditions in an economy. Now, as we know, aggregate supply conditions, or aggregate supply, is formed by two factors, primary and secondary. Just going to note, aggregate supply equals primary plus secondary factors. And as we know, as we talked about this throughout our series of aggregate supply lectures, aggregate supply, or the primary factors of aggregate supply, include land, labor, and capital, and our secondary factors are in fact our efficiency, so how we use these land, labor, and capital resources. So aggregate supply is equal to primary and secondary factors. And now, of course, this is not an actual mathematical equation. This is just to illustrate that aggregate supply is a component of both primary and secondary factors. So as we know, tightening welfare access will affect, firstly, the labour force participation rate, and also it can affect efficiency. So we're going to look at this through two ways. Firstly, through how it affects the labour force participation, and secondly, how it affects efficiency. Okay, so tightening welfare access is conducted by the federal government. So what they do is they firstly reduce the dole. So they decrease payments made to those wanting welfare. And secondly, they tighten the qualifications, or makes the qualifications of welfare harder. So what this means is that this goes through a means and assets test, and so only certain people can qualify for welfare, and this avoids what we call the welfare trap. And thirdly, what they do is they require the unemployed to keep job interview diaries. So this means that those unemployed who are living off these welfare payments also have to apply for jobs. And so they just can't keep on living off the government's welfare without actually interviewing for jobs and trying to obtain a job so that they can receive factor incomes. Okay, so how would this increase labour force participation? So let's look at this in terms of a cost-benefit analysis. Let's say transfer payments, or welfare, here is $200 a week. And now, of course, if you're on welfare, you have, let's say, 100 hours of leisure time. And if you're at work, or if you're working, you're receiving, say, $1,000 a week, just for example's sake. And as a result, because you work, say, 9 hours a day times 5, let's just make this a bit simpler for calculation's sake. Let's just say you work 10 hours a day times 5 days a week, and you get 50 hours of working time, and therefore you're left with 50 hours of leisure time. That means we can see that for people to work, that means 50 hours of leisure time foregone equals $800. So what this suggests is that if somebody came up to you and said, you can have, can I take 50 hours of your leisure time away? You would say, okay, only if you were being paid $800. So how does this apply to welfare payments? We can see that 100 hours of leisure time, that is worth around $200 a week for some people. Now, if we were to actually decrease this amount to, say, for example, $100, you apply the same cost-benefit analysis to the same person and will say, would you not work for a week if I paid you only $100? And so what this means is that they can only use $100 for that week. And sometimes leisure costs money. So, for example, if you're playing golf, or if you want to go on road trips, this costs money. and sometimes $100 a week is not enough to sustain these leisure activities. And so what that means is that they are forced to look for jobs. So how does that increase aggregate supply? It increases aggregate supply by increasing the labor force. And by all means, the labor force is of course a component, or is made up of, the unemployed and the employed. So in Australia, we are suffering from what is called a skills shortage. So we have a very low labour force participation rate. And although, as we'll see, that this is actually very high compared relative to history, we still have what is called a skills shortage. And so because most people are actually on welfare, and because welfare is over generous in some cases, they fall into what is known as this welfare trap. And so that disincentivizes people who would actually be employed from actually going to find a job, because they are so caught up with getting welfare benefits from the government. And so by tightening welfare tests, this forces people to improve their skills so as to get jobs. And what this means is that although the labour force is a component of employed and unemployed people, this means that once people get their qualifications, improve their skills in order to get their jobs, that means employment will decrease as well as skilled labour. So as a result, labour force would increase, and also we can see that efficiency will increase because people would tend to go back to school, get qualifications, and improve their work efficiency. So that's one way efficiency can improve. The second way efficiency can improve is we're going to look at from the perspective of those already employed. Now, as we talked about through budgetary policy, welfare comes from taxation, right? And the more we have unemployed, the more taxation the government has to take from those employed. And if they decrease welfare payments through this policy of tightening welfare access, that means they require less taxation because their revenue or their expenses go down. So their expenses by the government go down. So as a result, we can see that there are levels or lower levels of income tax. And so in theory, what would happen is that this could potentially incentivize those already working or workers to increase hours. So what this suggests is that those already working will tend to actually improve their efficiency so that they increase their income, and because taxation rates have gone down, this would increase their disposable income relative to their actual real incomes. So as a result, people would tend to become more efficient because their financial incentives have gone up. So as a result, as we can see from statistics, the labour force participation rate, which we're just going to note LFPR, has increased from 62% of the population to 65% from 2000 to 2011, and that's an all-time high for Australia. And so as a result, we can see that labour forces increase, the primary factors of aggregate supply have increased, as well as our secondary factors of aggregate supply increasing due to one, an increase in skilled employment due to people entering the labour force and gaining qualifications through tightening welfare access, as well as an increase in skill or an increase in efficiency from those already employed because of increased financial incentives derived from lower taxation.